Rain pelted the cracked asphalt in sheets so heavy it blurred the world into grey streaks. Somewhere beneath the choking roar of water and wind, a faint whimper pierced through, a sound so fragile, so desperate, that it gnawed at the edges of every instinct I had. The dog's body, thin and shivering, was tangled in a rusted chain that scraped against the wet concrete, each pull a cruel reminder of how long he had been trapped. His eyes, wide and trembling, met mine for the briefest instant, and I felt the weight of every lonely night he had endured, every pang of hunger and fear. My hands shook as I crouched beside him, my fingers numb from the rain, but my heart hotter than any summer day, burning with the need to save him. Every second stretched, and the storm seemed to echo his struggle, turning the night into a symphony of chaos and hope. I knew that if I hesitated, even for a heartbeat, the fight we were about to face together could end before it had truly begun. The rain had become a relentless drum against the world, each drop a sharp reminder that the night was not forgiving. I could barely see him at first, just a shaking blur beneath the shadows of a broken fence. But the faint whimpering carried through the storm, raw and human in its anguish. The dog's fur, matted and streaked with mud, clung to his trembling body, and every breath seemed a monumental effort. His eyes, dark and luminous, flickered between defiance and despair, as if he had lived too many nights hoping someone would notice, and now wondered if it was even worth it. I knelt closer, feeling the cold bite of the wet earth through my soaked clothes, my hands trembling as I reached toward him, uncertain whether he would flinch or bite, or simply curl tighter into himself and give up entirely. The wind clawed at my face, rain splashing into my eyes, but the sound of his quiet suffering cut through the chaos, sharper than the storm itself. Every instinct in me screamed to pull him free, yet fear rooted me to the spot, imagining the chain snapping under my fumbling hands, imagining the moment slipping through me again. And then, in that frail instant of connection, his eyes locking onto mine with a fragile glimmer of hope, I realized that hesitation was no longer an option. Whatever it took, he would not face this night alone. I pressed my hand gently against the slick metal of the chain, feeling the chill seep into my bones. His body tensed, rigid with instinctual caution, yet he did not recoil. Each small, measured motion became a silent conversation, my patience for his fear, his tentative trust in my touch. The storm seemed to hold its breath around us, the rain softening for a heartbeat as if the universe itself paused to witness this fragile alliance forming on the edge of despair. I whispered his name, though I did not know it, and the sound seemed to echo in the empty alley, bouncing off wet brick and shattered hope. There was a story written in the scars along his ribs, the thinness of his limbs, the haunted flicker behind his eyes. A story of nights spent alone, of hunger and fear so familiar it had become part of him. And yet, despite it all, he had not surrendered, had not given in completely to the shadows that pressed him down. My fingers closed around the chain with trembling determination. Every movement was painstaking, the slick metal threatening to slip, the ground beneath us uneven and unforgiving. He growled low in his throat, a warning or a plea. I could not tell, but I spoke softly, coaxing, apologizing without words, letting him know somehow that my hands were not there to hurt him. Rain sluiced over us in torrents, soaking through hair and skin, blurring the world into a chaotic smear of gray and brown and fleeting light. Yet within that blur, a quiet clarity emerged. Survival was not a solitary journey anymore. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of fear and fatigue, a tiny spark of trust flickered in him, almost imperceptible, but enough to anchor me to the task ahead. I leaned closer, my breath mingling with his ragged exhalations, feeling the tremors of life in a body that had been pushed to its edge, and I knew, without a doubt, that this was the moment that would decide everything. The first tug on the chain was tentative, a test of my intentions. He yanked back instinctively, claws scraping against wet concrete, muscles coiled like springs ready to flee or fight. I froze, letting him feel the choice was his, waiting out the storm of panic in his chest. The minutes stretched into a fragile eternity, each one weighted with the gravity of unspoken promises. The rain pounded harder, but I began to feel a rhythm in our struggle, a silent negotiation of trust, patience, and desperation. And then, as lightning split the sky in a brilliant, trembling arc, he finally allowed the chain to slide a fraction. Just enough to show that he was listening, that he was still fighting. Not against me, not against hope, but for the fragile possibility that maybe, just maybe, someone could care enough to save him. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and something fouled and metallic from the chain, and yet beneath it all, there was a subtle sweetness, a quiet reminder that life persisted in even the bleakest corners. I felt tears mix with the rain on my cheeks, not from the cold but from the gravity of the connection forming before me. Every muscle in his small frame quivered, yet he did not flee. His eyes searched mine, imploring, daring, trusting in the most elemental way, and in that instant, the world narrowed to nothing but the two of us, two beings battered and afraid, yet unwilling to give in to the night. I inhaled the storm around us, grounding myself in its chaos, and prepared to take the first real step toward pulling him from despair. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, it felt possible that the dog and I might survive the night together, bound by the unspoken covenant of mutual rescue. The rain had begun to slow, muting into a persistent drizzle that left the world slick and gleaming, but the storm inside the alley had only just begun. The dog's muscles were coiled, taut with a fear that refused to yield, and every attempt to move the chain was met with sharp resistance, low growls, and a flash of teeth that made my chest tighten. His eyes darted to every shadow, every corner, every movement of my hands, calculating, measuring, deciding whether I was predator or savior. I spoke softly, but the words seemed swallowed by the wet concrete and a thick, humid air. The storm had receded from the sky, but it remained in him, in the tremor of his paws, the way his tail tucked low, the quiver of his ears. And I realized that rescuing him would require more than strength. It would require patience, intuition, and an understanding I did not yet fully possess. I reached slowly, fingers brushing against the slick metal again, and he recoiled instinctively, a flash of panic making his thin ribs ripple under damp fur. The chain rattled sharply, echoing against the alley walls, and I froze, counting every breath, every heartbeat, gouging whether to retreat or press on. For a long moment we existed in silence, each of us measuring the other. The smell of rain soaked earth and something faintly acrid from his chain hung in the air, thick and tangible. His eyes, wide and haunted, caught mine again, searching, demanding, weighing. I knelt lower, letting my body speak the language my words could not: stillness, calm, resolve. Slowly, I began to inch the chain toward freedom, a fraction of a meter at a time, each movement deliberate, careful, a negotiation of trust. The dog growled softly low in his throat, and then flinched at my hand. I froze, chest tight, aware that the smallest misstep could shatter this fragile bridge we were building. And then, in a moment so subtle it nearly slipped past perception, his growl softened, the tension in his shoulders eased, and the chain moved with a reluctant willingness. It was not surrender. It was acknowledgement, a silent pact that for now, we would face the storm together. The alley smelled of wet brick, iron, and cold asphalt, every surface slick underfoot, every shadow elongated and trembling in the dim light of a broken street lamp. My fingers fumbled at the lock, hands slick with rain and sweat, and I felt his body shift under mine, coiling and recoiling like a spring. Panic flared in his gaze, bright and fierce, and I had to breathe through the terror, grounding myself in its intensity. I whispered to him, naming the unspoken, "You are not alone, you are not forgotten, you are safe." My words felt almost ridiculous against the vastness of the night, yet he paused, ears twitching, muscles trembling, but still present. The first small tug on the chain was a victory, a hesitant nod to trust, and I felt my own heartbeat slow, as if the air itself had thinned, leaving nothing between us but survival and intention. Minutes stretched like hours as we danced the precarious rhythm of rescue. He leapt away, then hesitated. I leaned forward, then paused, the chain rattled, claws scraped, rain dripped from every edge of the alley, pooling around our feet in dark, reflective mirrors. Every inch gained was a battle, every pause a negotiation, every flash of his fearful gaze a reminder of the nights he had endured alone. I imagined each of them, the hunger, the cold, the endless waiting, and it broke something open inside me, a tenderness fierce enough to burn. My hands were raw, my arms trembling, But I could not relent. He was worth the ache, the fear, the hours it might take to undo the years of neglect pressed into his thin frame. At last, a small victory the chain gave, sliding free just enough that his body could shift without pain, and he froze, muscles taut, breathing ragged, eyes wide with uncertainty. I froze too, not daring to move too quickly, letting the quiet between raindrops hold us in fragile suspension. The world seemed to hush around us, the drizzle fading to a soft patter, the distant hum of the city muted by the immediacy of this moment. He inched forward, nose to the wet ground, sniffing cautiously, testing the air, testing me. Then, almost imperceptibly, he met my gaze again, a flicker of recognition in the depths of fear. And in that brief, luminous instant, I felt it. The first thread of trust woven between us, delicate and trembling, yet strong enough to begin the slow, perilous climb toward hope. The struggle was far from over. His body ached, his mind quivered, and the night remained an unpredictable expanse of shadows. But for the first time since I had found him, I believed he could survive not alone but with me. And as I rose slowly, hands slick and trembling, eyes locked on his wary figure, I realized that the fight within him mirrored my own, the battle against fear, against doubt, against the weight of a storm we could not control. The dog had resisted, clawed, and growled, yet he had not fled completely. He had chosen, in his own wary, fragile way, to begin to trust. And that choice, tenuous though it was, would be the first step toward the miracle that neither of us could yet imagine. The first light of dawn was barely a whisper against the horizon, pale and tentative, spilling through clouds that still lingered like ghosts of the storm. The alley, once a theater of chaos and fear, now lay quiet, wet surfaces glinting with soft reflections of the waking world. The dog lay low against the damp asphalt, body tense but no longer rigid, eyes flicking toward me with cautious curiosity rather than raw terror. Every tremor in his frame spoke of nights endured and battles survived, and I found myself holding my breath, not wanting to break the fragile peace that had settled between us. I knelt near him again, letting my hands rest lightly on the wet concrete before making contact, allowing him to decide the pace of the connection. The rain had stopped, but the smell of wet earth and iron lingered, grounding us both in reality, a reminder that life persisted even after devastation. I whispered to him in soft tones, letting my words carry the weight of promises I could not yet fulfill, but intended to keep safety, warmth, companionship. He flinched at first, pulling back slightly, but then hesitated, ears twitching as if listening for something more than sound, something deeper. His gaze met mine for the longest moment, flickering with something I could not name at first. Trust, maybe, or perhaps just curiosity. But it was enough to coax a fragile smile from me, wet and cold though it was. I reached toward him again, this time letting my fingers hover near his head, allowing the faint brush of contact without pressure. The subtle gesture spoke louder than any words. I was patient, I was here, I would not hurt you. And slowly, tentatively, he leaned into it, head lowering in a quiet concession, a whisper of trust forming between us. The morning air was sharp, filled with the scent of damp concrete, mud, and something faintly sweet from new grass at the alley's edge. Birds called in scattered notes overhead, indifferent witnesses to the small, miraculous bond forming below. The dog's body relaxed slightly, muscles unwinding, paws settling against the cold ground. I watched him, memorizing the curves of his frail frame, the faint scars along his ribs, the way his tail twitched uncertainly before dropping softly to the wet surface. Every motion was a negotiation, every glance a conversation without words. He had survived, yes, but survival alone was not enough. Now he needed connection, guidance, and the courage to believe in the world beyond fear. And I realized, with a tenderness that almost hurt, that he would teach me as much as I would teach him. We moved slowly from the alley, every step deliberate. He sniffed, hesitated, and then took another step forward, letting me guide without forcing, letting the world show itself in small, navigable doses. The first touch of sunlight on his damp fur cast a halo around him, and I felt my heart tighten with both relief and awe. The world, still slick and wet from the night's storm, seemed to recognize the miracle taking place, the fragile bond of trust growing stronger with every cautious movement. I spoke softly as we walked, narrating the mundane world in gentle tones, letting the sounds of birds, distant traffic, and dripping eaves fill the spaces between us. He responded with subtle shifts of posture, tentative glances, and the softest wag of a tail, almost imperceptible but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. By the time we reached a quieter corner beyond the alley, the first tangible sense of connection had solidified. He moved closer without prompting, a small step toward dependence and acceptance, while I remained a careful, steady presence, never forcing, never rushing. The storm had passed, leaving a world glistening with light and opportunity, yet the true transformation had occurred within us both. The dog, once a bundle of trembling fear and raw survival instinct, had begun to accept the possibility of safety, and I had begun to understand the depth of responsibility that trust demanded. In those quiet, luminous hours, the foundations of our fragile bond were laid, not with grand gestures, but with soft touches, patient words, and the acknowledgement that even in the aftermath of despair, life and connection could begin anew. The world outside was waking in soft golden light, yet inside the small space I had led him to, shadows lingered stubbornly, draped over corners and beneath furniture like old memories. The dog's body shivered not from cold but from exhaustion, the subtle tremor of muscles taxed by fear, hunger, and past abuse. I watched him pace the small room, eyes flicking to every sound, the hum of distant traffic, the faint rustle of a curtain, even the subtle creak of my own movements. Each step was measured, cautious, an unspoken negotiation between instinct and the fragile trust he had begun to extend. I knelt on the worn rug beside him, feeling the tension in his spine beneath damp fur, and whispered reassurances, though I was acutely aware that words alone could not erase the invisible wounds etched into his body and mind. Every breath he drew seemed deliberate, labored with a history of survival rather than comfort, and I knew that the next hours would test not only his resilience but mine as well. Feeding him was the first battle. He approached the bowl of warm, simple food with hesitance, nose twitching, body low to the ground, ready to flee at the slightest threat. I knelt beside him, hand hovering, allowing him to choose. He sniffed, then recoiled, then returned again, tentative and trembling, ears pressed back as though bracing for pain. I spoke softly, offering no commands, only patience, letting him discover the small mercy of nourishment on his own terms. Each morsel consumed was a quiet victory, and I counted them silently, measuring progress not in grand gestures but in the tiny increments of trust. The storm of his past raged beneath his fur, in the tremor of paws and tail, in the flicker of uncertainty behind his eyes, but with each careful bite, the tempest began to abate, just slightly. Just enough for hope to seep in. The real test came when he stumbled into weakness. The thin frame that had endured so many nights alone finally faltered, body folding with fatigue and faint tremors that whispered of internal struggle. His breaths were shallow, uneven, each one a testament to battles unseen, and I felt panic rise like a tide threatening to drown me. I lifted him gently, cradling his fragile form, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily against my chest. His eyes met mine in a fleeting moment, wide and unguarded, and I felt an avalanche of empathy, guilt, and determination converge. I was no longer a mere observer. I had become a lifeline, the fragile tether between his body and survival. Every careful step I took, every whispered word, every measured movement was a negotiation with fate itself. The night brought its own trials. A low fever flickered across his thin body, shadows dancing beneath his skin, and I worked tirelessly to cool him, soothe him, press the warmth of human presence into every trembling limb. His whimpers were soft, pitiful, yet resolute, a constant reminder that despite the fragility of his form, his will to survive burned fiercely. I sat beside him, hand pressed to his side, counting heartbeats, listening to labored breaths, murmuring promises of safety into the quiet. Outside, the moon rose pale and indifferent, casting silver light across a world that seemed suddenly immense, full of potential danger and tentative hope. Every hour stretched into eternity, every minor improvement a miracle against the odds stacked mercilessly against him. By dawn, the first small victories emerged. His breathing steadied, tremors subsided, and his eyes, once wide with fear, softened with recognition and reliance. Yet the test was far from over. His body was still fragile, his mind still haunted, and every moment carried the potential for relapse. I understood then that faith was not a single act but a continuum, a patient endurance of small crises, a commitment to remain present when the world threatened to fall apart. In the quiet aftermath of the night's trials, I sat beside him and felt the bond between us deepen, tempered by hardship and sealed by perseverance. The miracle had not yet fully arrived, but its first light flickered in the form of trust, resilience, and the unspoken promise that neither of us would face the darkness alone again. Sunlight poured through the windows in soft, golden streams, scattering across the room in a warmth that felt almost miraculous after nights of rain, cold, and uncertainty. The dog lay stretched on the rug, chest rising and falling with steady breaths, the tremors of fatigue finally easing into the rhythm of calm. His fur, still damp from the last night's storm, glinted in the morning light, revealing the scars and thinness that told a story of survival, of nights spent alone, of battles fought silently. I knelt beside him, running my fingers along the curve of his back, tracing the scars that mapped his past suffering. There was still wariness in his eyes, that faint flicker of fear, but it was tempered now by curiosity, by recognition, by something almost like gratitude. Each breath he took was a small victory, a declaration that life was worth living, that trust could exist even after darkness. Outside, the world awakened fully. Birds called from tree branches, leaves shimmered with dew, and the air carried the soft, earthy scent of renewal. I watched him shift, tentatively rising on unsteady legs, testing the strength he had fought to reclaim. His tail lifted slightly, a hesitant wag that seemed almost shy but unmistakably joyful. The room, once filled with shadows and whispered fears, now held light, warmth, and the quiet hum of shared survival. I whispered to him, not to instruct but to celebrate, letting him know that the night's terror had passed, that he was safe, that together we had endured what neither could have survived alone. The miracle was not in the absence of pain, but in the resilience, the recovery, the bond that had grown quietly, fiercely in its wake. We ventured outside together, the first tentative steps into a world that had always seemed vast and threatening, now softened by the presence of trust. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the hum of distant traffic, the song of a bird overhead, was a story, a landscape of possibilities he had never known before. He paused frequently, nose twitching, ears alert, muscles coiled with lingering caution, yet every step was slower, steadier, more confident. And with each glance he cast toward me, I saw the reflection of connection, of reliance, of the unspoken understanding that he no longer needed to face the world alone. His eyes, once shadowed with fear, now glimmered with life resilience and the tentative joy of newfound hope. The day unfolded slowly, in moments both monumental and minute. I watched him explore the small yard, sniffing the wet grass, chasing a falling leaf, pausing to listen to a distant sound that once would have sent him into panic. He returned to my side without hesitation, brushing against me, pressing into my leg with a quiet declaration, "I trust you." The sun climbed higher, golden light warming our bodies, and I realized that the miracle we had fought for was not sudden or dramatic. It was cumulative, built from hours of patience, persistence, and quiet courage. Every small movement, every shared breath, every tender glance was part of the tapestry of recovery and trust, a reminder that even in the darkest nights, life could flourish again. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the yard, the dog curled beside me, resting his head against my knee. The scars on his body were still visible, his history still written in the fine tremors of muscle and skin. Yet the fear that had once dominated him had begun to fade into memory. He breathed steadily, tail relaxed, eyes half closed in the gentle comfort of safety, and I felt an overwhelming sense of completion, of closure, of miracle realized. The storm behind us had shaped us both, leaving a world polished by rain, softened by struggle, and illuminated by trust. And in that quiet, luminous moment, I understood miracles are not always loud or instant. They are lived, moment by moment, in patience, courage, and the unwavering act of choosing to remain, to care, to believe. The dog stirred slightly, nuzzling closer, and I rested my hand on his back, letting the golden light settle over us. Outside, the world moved on, but in that small yard, in that fragile bond forged in fear and strengthened in hope, the miracle was complete, and the story of survival had become a story of love. Weeks had passed since the storm, and the world had settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary, yet nothing about it was the same. The dog, once a trembling shadow of fear, now padded beside me through sunlit streets with a quiet confidence that spoke of battles survived and trust earned. His fur had begun to regain the soft luster of health, his eyes bright with curiosity and recognition, and his movements held a freedom that had once seemed impossible. I watched him pause in a patch of grass, nose twitching as he explored the sense of a world that had been denied to him for so long, and I felt a swell of awe. Every careful step he took was a testament to resilience, a quiet celebration of life reclaimed. The scars remained etched into skin and memory, but they no longer defined him. They were markers of endurance, proof of the nights that had forged his courage. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, golden rays across the yard where he played, chasing a leaf with abandon, ears flopping and tail wagging without hesitation. I knelt on the ground nearby, hands resting on the warm earth, and felt the profound stillness that comes when survival becomes joy, when fear softens into trust. There were moments when he paused, head cocked, as though sensing the invisible threads of memory stretching backward, the shadows of hunger and pain that had once bound him so tightly. And in those moments, I reached out, offering a touch, a whisper, a gentle reminder the past had passed, but the present was ours. He met my gaze with a quiet intensity. The bond between us solidified not by words or commands, but by shared hardship, patience, and unwavering presence. Time moved slowly in the golden light. I watched him curl at my feet in the afternoon warmth, breathing evenly, muscles relaxed, eyes half lidded in the ease of safety. The world beyond the yard continued in its chaos, cars humming, neighbors chatting, birds calling, yet inside this small sphere, there was a profound peace, hard-won and luminous. I thought of the nights of rain, the chains, the trembling, the small victories that had felt monumental at the time, and I realized that every moment had led to this life thriving, trust blooming, and the miracle no longer a single event, but a living, breathing reality between us. He nudged my hand gently with his nose, a simple act of connection that spoke volumes. I trust you. I am safe. I am alive. I leaned down, pressing my cheek lightly to his fur, feeling the warmth of life against my skin, and understood that rescue is never just a matter of freeing someone from physical bonds. It is about presence, endurance, patience, and the courage to remain when all the world seems to have abandoned hope. Every scar he carried, every instinct shaped by fear, had been met with care, and in return, he had gifted me the most profound lesson of all, that even the smallest thread of trust can weave a bond strong enough to withstand the storms of life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting amber light across our yard, I felt a quiet ache of gratitude, a deep, resonant understanding that this was more than survival, it was transformation. The dog lifted his head, ears pricked, tail wagging, and I could see the story written in every line of his body, the fear, the struggle, the growth, and finally, the blossoming joy of life embraced fully. The miracle had arrived not in a moment of spectacle, but in the steady, unwavering heartbeat of shared endurance. The storm was behind us, sunlight had settled into our bones, and the bond forged in darkness now carried us both forward, luminous and unbroken, into every tomorrow that awaited. The sun dipped low, spilling a final ribbon of golden light across the yard. The dog lay curled at my feet, chest rising and falling in steady, unhurried rhythm, eyes half closed yet alert, ears twitching at the faintest sound of the world around him. For the first time, he was no longer a creature defined by fear, no longer bound by chains or haunted by shadows of the past. Every scar, every tremor, every hesitant glance toward me had been transformed into a quiet testament of survival and trust. I reached down, letting my hand brush along his back, and he pressed into the touch, a simple gesture that carried volumes. He was safe, he was loved, and he was home. The world beyond the yard continued its restless hum, yet within our small corner, time slowed. The air smelled of earth and warmth, of rain softened into sunlight, and a soft breeze carried with it the faint scent of promise. I realized then that miracles are rarely sudden, dramatic moments. They are lived, woven from hours of patience, courage, and quiet presence. The dog lifted his head, gazed at me with eyes that mirrored both past struggle and newfound joy, and I felt a wave of something indescribable: relief, gratitude, awe, and love all at once. The storm was behind us, but the bond forged in darkness now carried us forward, luminous and unbroken. As evening settled, shadows stretching long across the grass, I whispered to him what I could not say to the world: we endured, we survived, and together we will continue to do so. He nudged my hand again, tail wagging lightly, and I knew this was more than rescue. It was a promise kept, a life reclaimed, a soul lifted. The world could rage, storms could come and go, but here, in this quiet sanctuary of trust and love, we had found the miracle that mattered most: each other. And with that, the sun sank below the horizon, leaving a gentle, golden glow, a perfect seal on a story of fear transformed into hope, pain transformed into love, and a life once fragile now thriving in the light.